You're listening to the podcast My Story, My Song with host Nathan Maack. On today's episode, you'll hear Nathan tell you another compelling story about the writer of the song and what inspired the song to be written. You'll also hear a great arrangement of the song by Nathan or one of his friends. And now, let's go to Nathan Maack for today's story.
The year was 1862. The United States of America was divided, North and South, brother against brother. And as the day grew closer to the inevitable, the tension had been built. The Civil War was about to erupt. And that's where this episode's song comes into view. But first, let's go back to May 27th, 1819 in New York City. That's the date the lyricist of this song was born. Julia Ward Howe grew up in a wealthy family. In fact, she had well-known and distinguished family members from both her father and mother. Her ancestors were very involved and known in the revolutionary efforts of America. Julia was raised in a conservative Episcopalian home. Her father was a Calvinist and was very committed to his beliefs. Unfortunately for him, she began to drift from her faith and all but rejected the viewpoints she grew up knowing. She became very liberal, and that included the doctrine and beliefs of her religious viewpoints. Well, in 1848, Julia married Dr. Samuel Gridley Howe. He was a well-known humanitarian and was also 20 years older than her. After getting married, the two moved from Boston to Washington, D.C., where Dr. Howe had taken a job in medical service with the government. One day, as they were making their way down the streets of Washington, Julia became saddened by the tension and all the work going into the war effort. She watched and listened as the troops preparing for upcoming battles sang a song to an old Southern tune called John Brown's Body. It was a song about an abolitionist who was hanged for what he did to try and free the slaves. You can just imagine the darkness of those words. Julia was visiting friends one day, and a former pastor, Reverend James Freeman Clark of Boston, turned to her and said, "Why don't you write some decent words for that tune?" Julia in turn replied, "I will." This is Julia's account of how the lyrics came to be. I awoke in the gray of the morning, and as I lay waiting for dawn, the long lines of the desired poem began to entwine themselves in my mind, and I said to myself, I must get up and write these verses lest I fall asleep and forget them. So I sprang out of bed and in the dimness found an old stump of a pen, which I remembered using the day before. I scrawled the verses almost without looking at the paper. The Battle Hymn of the Republic, a song that became a rallying cry during the Civil War, words that were sung in place of the original as a patriotic salute to those going into battle. Although Julia rejected much of her religious views and became a member of the Unitarian Church, she always maintained her belief in the presence of a personal God and his overruling power and truth in controlling the affairs of mankind. The words to this song can attest to that fact. There is an account written of a large patriotic rally that was attended by President Abraham Lincoln. A soloist proudly rang out the Battle Hymn of the Republic to thunderous applause. President Lincoln had tears in his eyes and stepped to the podium. He shouted out, "Sing it again!" And it was, and it still is, a rallying song of patriotism, of our nation's Christian heritage, and a word of how God's truth will continue to be heard and read and learned, no matter who is in charge or what the rules, laws, and mandates are handed down. Here is the Battle Hymn of the Republic.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of My Story, My Song with host Nathan Maack. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast on the app you use to hear all of the latest stories and music. And check out Nathan's website at www.nathanmaack.com to keep up with all of Nathan's music ministries, including other web shows, his email newsletter, tour schedule, and much more. Until next time, thank you again for listening to My Story, My Song.